Before Muhammad Ali ever stood across the ring from George Foreman, the two men had already built terrifying reputations. Joe Frazier had been unbeaten when George Foreman dismantled him. Foreman then continued knocking opponents down one after another, building an aura of power that seemed almost impossible to break. And somewhere on the other side of that destruction stood Muhammad Ali, a former champion fighting his way back toward the top. This is the story of how three of heavyweight boxing's most dangerous fighters crossed paths, and how the careers of Frazier, Foreman, and Ali became connected by some of the most brutal nights the sport had ever seen. Joe Frazier entered the heavyweight division as a relentless pressure fighter. He was not the tallest man in the division. He did not have the reach of Muhammad Ali or the natural size of George Foreman. What Frazier had was pressure. He came forward, he attacked the body, and most importantly, he carried one of the most feared left hooks in heavyweight history. By the time Frazier reached 16 victories without a defeat, he had already shown that he was more than another promising contender. Against George Chuvalo, the fight became another example of his punishing style. Frazier's pressure eventually produced an opening above Chuvalo's eye, and the referee stopped the contest. Frazier moved on. Another opponent, another test, another chance to prove that he belonged among the best heavyweights in the world. Against Marion Connor, Frazier continued to rely on the weapon that had become his trademark, his furious left hand. The victories kept coming. Then came Buster Mathis. Mathis entered the fight unbeaten himself, carrying a perfect record. That made the meeting especially important. Frazier was no longer simply beating experienced fighters. He was now facing men who had yet to taste defeat. And Frazier kept moving forward. His record continued to grow. Then came Manuel Ramos. Frazier's pressure once again became the difference. Ramos was knocked down, and the punishment continued. By this stage, the pattern was becoming familiar. Frazier would close the distance. He would attack. He would force his opponent to fight at a pace that few heavyweights could survive. And sooner or later, the left hook would arrive. Frazier eventually reached 25 victories without a defeat. Then he faced Bob Foster. Foster was a dangerous fighter with a reputation of his own. For a moment, he looked capable of resisting Frazier's pressure. Then Frazier landed the shot that changed everything. Foster was badly hurt and somehow managed to rise. Frazier saw the opening. He moved forward to finish the fight. The unbeaten heavyweight champion had done it again. Frazier's reputation was no longer built simply on his record. It was built on what happened to the men standing opposite him. And that reputation was about to become even stronger. Terry Daniels was another fighter who entered the ring believing he could challenge Frazier. Daniels tried to establish his own rhythm with the jab. Frazier barely seemed bothered. Then came the left hook. Daniels was hurt. Another punch followed. Then another combination. Daniels tried to survive, but Frazier kept closing the distance. The punches kept coming from both sides. A left, a right, another left. Frazier was not giving Daniels the space he needed to recover. The knockdowns followed. Daniels continued trying to fight back, showing courage even while absorbing heavy punishment. That was one of the defining characteristics of Frazier's opponents. They were not always outclassed technically. Sometimes they simply could not withstand the pressure for long enough. Frazier eventually moved on to bigger challenges. He defeated Jerry Quarry and continued building one of the strongest records in the heavyweight division. And while Frazier was becoming a champion, another dangerous heavyweight was beginning to emerge. His name was George Foreman. Foreman did not fight like Frazier. He was bigger. He was stronger. And his punches seemed to carry a different kind of force. Foreman's early career became a long list of opponents who could not survive his power. Bob Hazelton was one of them. Foreman put him down early. Jack O'Halloran was another experienced heavyweight who could not stop the rising contender. Then came George Chuvalo. Chuvalo was famous for toughness. He was the kind of fighter who could absorb punishment and keep coming. Foreman gave him no chance to settle into the fight. The pressure became so overwhelming that Chuvalo's corner was calling for the contest to be stopped. The referee eventually ended it. Foreman's record continued to grow. Boone Kirkman tried to survive against him. Instead, Foreman trapped him and began landing heavy punches. Kirkman struggled to respond. Foreman's right hand hurt him. Then the left. Then another right. He was trapped against the ropes, unable to produce the shot he needed. Foreman kept attacking until the referee had seen enough. The wins kept piling up. The knockouts kept coming. And slowly, the boxing world began to understand something. George Foreman was not simply another heavyweight contender. He was becoming a problem nobody knew how to solve. Foreman's power became even more frightening as his record approached the top of the division. He demolished opponent after opponent. The names changed. The result often did not. Then came the fight that would dramatically change the careers of both George Foreman and Joe Frazier. Frazier entered the ring unbeaten. 29 victories. No defeats. A heavyweight champion who had already proven himself against some of the best fighters in the world. Foreman entered with an aura of his own. He was undefeated. He was younger. He was powerful. And he was about to challenge the man many believed was the strongest heavyweight on the planet. The opening moments were shocking. Foreman attacked immediately. Frazier was knocked down. Then he was down again. The champion was trying to recover, but Foreman simply would not allow him to regain control. Another knockdown came. Then another. Frazier's legs were struggling to keep him upright. Foreman kept walking forward. There was no hesitation. No respect for Frazier's reputation. The undefeated champion was being overwhelmed by a younger heavyweight whose punches were changing the entire fight. Frazier kept getting up. That was Joe Frazier. He had built his career on toughness. He refused to surrender. Even after repeated knockdowns, he tried to continue. Foreman kept finding him. Another punch. Another knockdown. The fight had become almost impossible to recognize as a battle between two unbeaten champions. It was a demolition. Frazier had entered the ring undefeated. He left without his title and with the first defeat of his professional career. George Foreman had announced himself in the loudest possible way. He had not simply beaten Joe Frazier. He had destroyed the man who had previously looked almost impossible to beat. And suddenly, the heavyweight division had a new monster at the top. Foreman continued. He defeated Jose Roman. Then came Ken Norton. Norton was another serious contender. He had the size, skill, and experience to trouble a heavyweight champion. Foreman did not care. The fight quickly turned into another demonstration of power. Norton was sent down. He tried to recover. Foreman attacked again. The punches came in combinations, and Norton struggled to remain upright. The contest ended. Another undefeated contender had been broken down. George Foreman was now 40-0. His reputation had become enormous. But then came Ron Lyle. Lyle was different. He was willing to stand and exchange. He did not enter the ring simply to survive. The two heavyweights traded powerful punches. For once, Foreman was not walking through an opponent without resistance. Lyle fired back. Foreman answered. The fight became dangerous for both men. One mistake could end everything. That was the reality of fighting George Foreman. Even when someone managed to hurt him, they still had to survive what came back. And Foreman's career continued. More opponents, more knockouts, more victories. The number beside his name kept climbing. But the most important name from his past was still Joe Frazier. Frazier and Foreman met again. By then, the story was different. Frazier was no longer the unbeaten champion who had entered their first meeting. Foreman was now an established force. The rematch once again showed Foreman's power. The younger heavyweight continued to overwhelm Frazier. And the myth of George Foreman only grew stronger. Foreman went on to defeat Scott Ledoux, then John Dino Dennis, then Steve Zuski, then Rocky Sikorsky. Again and again, opponents were placed in front of him. Again and again, they were forced to absorb his punches. Foreman did not always need one perfect punch. He could build punishment through combinations. He could trap a man against the ropes. He could use his size to make the ring feel smaller. And when an opponent began to slow, Foreman became even more dangerous. Rocky Sikorsky took a terrible beating. The punishment eventually became too much. Foreman's career continued into a long sequence of victories. He beat Guido Train. He defeated Dwight Muhammad Kawi. He returned against Frank Lux. Then Bobby Hitz. Then Tony Fulangi. Mark Young tried to survive. Foreman kept landing. A right hand. Then another combination. Young was taking enormous punishment. Foreman's career had become a collection of moments like this. Opponents would enter believing they had a chance. Then Foreman would begin landing. And the fight would slowly become a matter of survival. By the time Foreman reached the later stages of this run, he had established himself as one of the most feared punchers in heavyweight history. Yet there was one fighter who had not been destroyed by him: Muhammad Ali. Ali's story had started years earlier. Before George Foreman became champion, Ali had already built one of the most remarkable careers boxing had ever seen. He had defeated Willie Besmanoff. He had survived a frightening moment against Sonny Banks. Banks managed to put Ali down. For a young fighter who had built his reputation on speed and confidence, that knockdown was a warning. Ali got back up and continued. Then came Archie Moore. Moore had enormous experience. His record was unlike anything Ali had faced before. But Ali's youth and speed were too much. The young heavyweight continued winning. Then came Henry Cooper. That fight became one of the defining early moments of Ali's career. Cooper possessed a dangerous left hook. Ali was confident, perhaps too confident. Then Cooper found him. Ali was hurt badly. The fight suddenly looked very different. The young challenger had to survive. And somehow, he did. Ali returned to the fight and eventually forced the stoppage. The lesson was important. Ali could be hurt. He could be pressured. He could be pushed in difficult moments. Yet he had a remarkable ability to recover. Then came Sonny Liston. Liston was one of the most feared heavyweights in the world. Many expected Ali to be overwhelmed. Instead, Ali shocked boxing. He defeated Liston and became heavyweight champion. Then came the rematch. Ali again found a way to beat Liston. His reputation changed forever. He was no longer simply the talented young boxer with fast hands. He was the champion. Ali defeated Floyd Patterson. He defeated Brian London. He overcame Carl Mildenberger. Then came Cleveland Williams. Williams was dangerous. Ali was faster. The fight became one of Ali's finest performances. He moved. He attacked. He controlled the distance. Williams struggled to keep up. Ali's reputation continued to grow. Zora Fali came next. Another experienced challenger. Another test. Another Ali victory. Then Oscar Bonavena. Bonavena was tough and difficult to discourage. Ali eventually dropped him and continued pressing until the fight was decided. Then came the difficult years. Ali was away from boxing. When he returned, he was no longer the same young champion who had once floated around the ring with almost effortless speed. He was older. He had been through more, and the heavyweight division had changed. Joe Frazier was now champion. Ali faced him. The fight became a brutal battle. Frazier kept coming. Ali had his moments. So did Frazier. When it ended, Ali suffered his first professional defeat. For the first time, the man who had seemed untouchable had been beaten. And that defeat changed everything. Ali kept fighting. He defeated Jurgen Blin. He defeated Bob Foster. Foster gave Ali a difficult fight and managed to cut him. Ali survived the challenge. Then the road led to a fighter who seemed almost impossible to defeat: George Foreman. Foreman entered the meeting with Ali undefeated. 40 victories, no defeats. He had destroyed Joe Frazier. He had destroyed Ken Norton. He had knocked out opponent after opponent. To many people, the question was not whether Ali could beat Foreman. The question was whether Ali could survive him. Foreman had the physical advantages. He was younger. He was stronger. His punching power had already been proven against elite heavyweights. Ali had speed, experience, ring intelligence, and confidence. But confidence alone would not be enough. Somewhere inside Ali's preparation was the knowledge that he could not fight Foreman in the same way he had fought many of his earlier opponents. He needed a different answer. The world was watching, and the fight would become one of the most famous heavyweight contests ever staged. Before Ali and Foreman met, Ali had already shown that age had not erased his ability to compete. He defeated Chuck Wepner. He defeated Jean-Pierre Koopman. He defeated Richard Dunn. The Dunn fight again showed Ali's ability to finish when the opening appeared. He was no longer the young champion of the early 1960s. He had become a veteran, a fighter who understood distance, timing, psychology, and pressure at a level few opponents could match. Foreman represented something different: raw power,
When boxing
youth,
fans alike,
physical strength,
the great
an unbeaten record. The contrast was almost perfect. Ali had already experienced defeat. Foreman had not. Ali had been hurt before. Foreman had rarely been seriously tested.
With
Ali
that
knew
right
what it
hand
felt
and getting
like to
away
lose
with
a
it.
championship. Foreman had never
With that
lost
right
one,
hand and getting
and
away
when
with
they
it.
finally stood across from each other, the boxing world waited to see which version of heavyweight greatness would prevail. The younger destroyer or the older master? The story of the confrontation became much bigger than a normal boxing match. It was not simply about two heavyweights. It was about everything that had happened before. Joe Frazier's unbeaten run had ended under Foreman's punches. Ken Norton's challenge had ended the same way. Foreman had built a record that seemed almost impossible to break.
A good battering in
Ali
this
had
round.
already defeated Sonny Liston. He had survived Henry Cooper. He had beaten Patterson. He had lost to Frazier. He had returned. Now he stood in front of the man who had destroyed Frazier. That connection mattered. Frazier had shown that Ali could be beaten. Foreman had shown that Frazier could be destroyed. And now Ali had to find an answer to the fighter who had overwhelmed them both. This was no longer simply another championship opportunity. It was a test of everything Ali had learned during his career. His speed, his intelligence, his toughness, his ability to adapt, and perhaps most importantly, his understanding of himself. George Foreman's record told one story. Muhammad Ali's career told another. Foreman had spent years proving that he could break opponents physically. Ali had spent years learning how to make opponents fight the fight he wanted. That difference would become critical, because sometimes boxing is not about who hits harder. Sometimes it is about who understands the fight better. Ali had been knocked down before. He had been cut. He had been hurt. He had been beaten. He had experienced moments when the entire direction of a fight changed in seconds. Foreman had rarely experienced that kind of adversity. That was the unknown. Could Foreman remain the same fighter if the fight did not go according to plan? Could Ali survive long enough to find out? The history leading into their meeting was filled with warning signs. Foreman had already beaten Frazier. He had already beaten Norton. He had already shown that elite heavyweights could not simply stand in front of him. Ali understood the danger. He knew that one clean punch could change everything. That is why the fight demanded more than courage. It demanded discipline. For Ali, the task was not simply to exchange punches with Foreman. It was to survive the moments when Foreman wanted to impose his strength, and then find opportunities of his own. The fight became a battle between youth and experience, power and movement, physical strength and tactical intelligence. And at the center of it all was Muhammad Ali, the same fighter who had once been dismissed as too young to beat Sonny Liston. The same fighter who had to Joe Frazier. The same fighter who kept returning. Years earlier, people had watched Joe Frazier march
Muhammad Ali is hot-shotting Frazier.
left hook. They watched George Foreman tear through him. They watched Foreman become almost unstoppable. They watched Ali struggle through the later stages of his career. All of those stories now pointed toward one night. The heavyweight division had produced a and standing in front of him, the champion had already been counted out more than once. That is what made the matchup so compelling. Foreman had everything people expected from a dominant heavyweight. Ali had something harder to measure: experience, awareness, and the belief that he could still find a way. The history of boxing is filled with powerful champions. Some win because they are stronger. Some win because they are faster. Some win because they can take more punishment than their opponents. The truly special ones learn how to change. Ali had changed many times. The young Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali. The fast-moving challenger became heavyweight champion. The champion became an outsider. The former champion became a veteran contender. Every stage demanded something different, and now he faced perhaps the greatest physical threat of his career. George Foreman, a fighter who had already turned Joe Frazier's perfect record into history. A fighter who had sent Ken Norton down. A fighter who had walked through heavyweight after heavyweight. A fighter who had never experienced professional defeat. Foreman. It was a chain of heavyweight history, and at the end of that chain stood two men waiting for the bell. George Foreman had spent years making opponents believe that the safest place was nowhere near him. Muhammad Ali had spent years proving that there was always another way to fight. That difference would define their meeting. For Foreman, it was another opportunity to prove that his power was greater than anyone's skill. For Ali, It was an opportunity to prove that intelligence, experience, and courage could overcome physical dominance. The world knew Foreman's record. The world knew Ali's name. What nobody knew was how the fight would actually